Hi, we're looking at the original intent of those who ratified our Constitution. And we've been looking at different aspects of what the Constitution ended up being. The government we got was a constitutional federal republic of vested, declared, and restricted representative powers. That was basically the whole 9 yards. And all of these things were very important to the people who ratified our Constitution. I want to look at the concept of amendments. And you have to understand that the people who ratified our Constitution wanted to have freedom. Freedom, in its basic definition, is the right to choose. We allowed people to be able to choose how they would worship. That was part of it. We'll get to that later at another time. I'll show you the documents where that happened. We wanted people to have the right to choose how they lived, for the most part, where they lived. And this was very important to the greater part of the people who were living in what would be the United States of America, okay, in the 1770s and 80s. There were people, many, who wanted to continue what had been in Europe. And what had been in Europe, and for the most part around the world, was a government tied to a religious group, a denomination of Christians or something else, depending on where you're at in the world, but always a government. And that government had the right to tell people what to do in all areas whatsoever. It was unrestricted. And often didn't have any declaration either. It was considered to be the power. And it worked in conjunction with whatever the religion was. In Europe, that had jumped back and forth between the Protestants and the Catholics. But people who were on the outs, like the Puritans, who would become the Congregationalists up in New England, ended up, depending on which way the wind was blowing at a specific time, get in trouble. You were not allowed to participate in the government. You had a very difficult time getting a good job, and many other things that would be held against you if you didn't agree with the politics or the religion that was the established or the establishment's politics and religion. It depended, if you were in France, it was in one thing, England was another thing, Germany was something else. And for the people who really didn't agree, they'd tie them to a stake and burn them to death, hang them, beat them, and do all kinds of other horrible things to them, imprison them. They were trying to avoid this, okay? Many people. There were some who simply wanted to go back to that system. It's the system they had functioned with. It was an aristocratic system with kings, and they wanted to do something very similar, and they wanted to do some at the state level. There were some who wanted to do it at a national level. There were some people who wanted to start their own kingdoms. They would have started their own countries. The one fellow down in Kentucky, he wanted to start Transylvania, I think is what he was going to call it. And he bought all the land from the Shawnees, that basically is what is Kentucky. You know, Shawnees, he paid a pretty good price to the Shawnees for it. They didn't bother to tell him that they didn't own it. It's a good deal for them. They got guns, and ammo. Oh yeah, they got a lot of good stuff for this guy. Didn't bother to tell him that A, they didn't own it, and B, the Cherokee shared usage of it, and he would have to deal with them. But then they figured That was the Cherokees' problem, not the Shawnees' problem. They just gotten paid. But, the different people had different things they wanted to do. Um, Freedom is what the people were trying to get. And they were trying to keep their government from being the thing, the tool that was used to enslave them. And we're going to go on with this. We're going to come back and look at how important this concept of using amendments to change your government was to the people who ratified our Constitution. Hopefully, this is helping.